everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about our Acura Legend project. As you know, we've been working on trying to fix the head gasket issue, and we've got everything mostly put back together. And this video is supposed to show you how we wrap up everything and start it for the first time. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen, and we're going to go into why that is here in just a moment. But it's something that's not going to get fixed well until the springtime for us. As you can tell by my attire and the fact that there's a snow shovel standing next to me, it's deep into the winter here in Vermont, and this next problem that we have to fix before we can start the car up is going to take some time, and it's going to require removing a crucial component of this car. So we're not going to be able to do it until warmer weather sets in. But let's go ahead and tell you what's going on with this car and what the problem is that we found. So here's where we stand with the Acura Legend. We've got the heads back on, we got the intake manifold back on, the fuel system mostly put back together, and we'll show you a little bit in this video today some of those things that we've done to get it to this point. But like I said in the intro of this video, this was supposed to be the fourth and final episode of us putting this car back together and starting it for the first time. Unfortunately, we found another problem. And that problem is going to require us removing the transmission on this vehicle. Now, I could climb under the car and show you what it is, but it's real simple to understand. On the back of the car, or on the back of the engine, I should say, sits a gasket. And that gasket wraps around your crankshaft. And your crankshaft spins. And as that spins, if that seal isn't perfect, oil leaks out and drains between the cylinder block and the transmission bell housing. Additionally, there's a small little O-ring, and you've kind of seen that on our Acura CL project that sits on the back plate. So what we're talking about here is two seals, and one of them is the rear main seal, and the other one is a little O-ring that helps prevent oil from escaping the engine, let's say. And to fix these two things, you have to remove the transmission. Now, to remove the transmission, it requires access right here. There's a couple bell house bolts that attach the bell housing of the transmission to the engine block. And those have to be accessed. The only way that you can access those is by keeping all of this easily open so that you can put tools in your hands down there. Unfortunately, if I would have discovered this sooner, I wouldn't have put everything back together here. And actually, it probably would have been easier to do this job with the intake manifold off and likely the heads off, at least the intake manifold. And I could pull it back apart very easily, but instead of disturbing the gaskets that are already in place, and the fact that it's not totally necessary to get to those bolts to remove this, to get to them, we're going to do it the way the shop manual says, which is just keeping that firewall free back there and open so that we can access those bolts. Now, this is a fairly easy job. On the Acura Legend, it's just a few bell housing bolts, and then, you know, the gear linkage, the shifter linkage, I should say, and then it just slides out for the most part. It's not like most cars where you've got to pull the drive shafts and you've got to, you know, finagle it out. It's relatively easy because the drive shafts go through a differential and it goes through the oil pan right here. The transmission sits further back. So it's relatively easy, and I say relatively easy because these are old torque converter style transmissions, and those old torque converter style transmissions, they weigh a lot. And that's why I'm not going to do this job until the springtime, when it's not -14 outside and about 40 degrees inside this garage. I don't mind working on the top here in 40 degrees, and I don't mind running multiple heaters so that I can get some of this work done. But there's nothing more aggravating to me than to climb under the car and lay on cold concrete, even though I do have a mat here and I could, you know, lay on a creeper. It's going to be difficult as it is to remove such a heavy element of this car. I don't want to do it while I'm freezing cold. So hopefully you can understand why there's going to be a little bit of a delay here on this project. Additionally, you know, I want to take my time. I've said that multiple times on this project, and I've got plenty of time. Like, even when spring comes around, this car can't go anywhere, can't access the roads any because I live on a dirt road, and we enter another season called mud season here in Vermont. And this car never travels on the roads during that time anyways. The earliest this car ever hits the road is May. So I've got warmer temperatures ahead, and I've got a bunch of time between now and when this car can actually hit the road. So while I've got it in this condition, I'll go ahead and do that. And I want to just explain why I'm not wrapping this up. Well, I'll wrap some of this up, obviously. It's not to a point where I want it right now, but I'm not going to completely wrap it up. And that's because to access the transmission anyways, you got to remove this Y pipe. So it really makes no sense to go ahead and remove it for the head job and the head gasket job. Reattach this just so I can call this project done and then start on the transmission project and have to remove it again. So while there's plenty of work to be done here, it's common sense just not to fully wrap it up and start it and do all of that until it's at a point when I can actually do the transmission removal and get to those rear main seal, the gasket and the other accessory gasket that's on that back panel. I've got everything ready to go. I've got all the parts. I'm planning ahead a little bit. But in the meantime, there's plenty of work to do. So let's go ahead and get into where we are right now and how we got there.
Okay, to start, you want to go ahead and remove the two oil passage valves located at the right side and left side of the block. Use a 10mm bolt to thread into the passage and then go ahead and pull them out. There are O-rings that need to be removed and serviced before you can put the heads back on. So what I'm doing here is threading it in with that bolt and then pulling it out, and then you'll find the O-ring that needs to be replaced. Alright, before we can go ahead and put the exhaust manifold back on, we need to make sure we clean the surfaces. There is definitely some pitting and some debris, mostly rust and corrosion on these parts. These are iron parts, so you're going to get some rust on there. That's perfectly normal. I'm using a carbide scraping tool right here to clean up some of the bigger debris that's on there, and then I'm going to go ahead and deck this with a block and some sandpaper. That'll make sure that I've got a nice smooth surface for my gasket to mate to. Pretty simple process, but you just want to take that extra step. Make sure that you don't have any exhaust leaks between your exhaust manifold and the head. All right, next we've got to make sure that the surface between the head and the block is nice and clean. So I'm going to lift it up out of the plastic bag here so that you can see that it's stuck to it, which means that there is some oil contamination on there that we need to remove. The best way to remove that is with the use of lacquer thinner. Just make sure that you use a lint-free rag or towel and some lacquer thinner to clean that up. You want to repeat the same process on the block side. What I'm doing right now is just trying to get any of that oil material off so that we have a nice clean mating surface for our head gasket to go on, and then eventually our head to go on. You want to use that same lacquer thinner that you use to clean the head to clean the block. I'm also removing some WD-40 that I use to get some of that carbon buildup off of the pistons and to protect some of the cylinder walls during the time of disassembly. Alright, with everything clean and the gasket in place, you can go ahead and put your head on. Pro tip here, you want to look through the holes in the head for those dowels, place them in line with the holes, and then once you're in place you can go ahead and rock the head on just a little bit to make sure that it's seated properly, just like that. If you use the top instead of the bottom where the dowels are, you'll likely end up scratching your head surface or you'll end up damaging that head gasket. So line up those holes with those dowels. Next, with your head in place, you can go ahead and grab your head bolts. Make sure that you put fresh oil on those threads. That's a crucial component to reassembly. Oil on the threads will allow you to have a nice torque spec. Additionally, you want to put some oil on the washers. This will make sure that you prevent any squeaking, any damaging. It'll have a nice smooth contact surface for those head bolts to get torqued down to. With all the head bolts in place, you can go ahead and start torquing them down. I go ahead and torque in 3 different series. So you want to do one pass in sequence, then do another pass to a slightly higher torque spec, and then go ahead and do it another time to a slightly higher torque spec before you reach your final torque spec of 60 foot-pounds. General rule of thumb is I do it between 10 and 15 foot-pound increments through each pass until that final one where I go ahead and torque it down to 60 foot-pounds. Take note of the torque sequence here. I'm working from the inside to the outside, and I'm going from top to bottom as I'm working my way from inside to out. This is important to make sure that you don't accidentally warp the head. Make sure that you have a good contact surface between the head, the gasket, and the block, and it will prevent any redo that you might have to do if you otherwise torqued it incorrectly and out of sequence.
All right, so let's go ahead and bring you in on the action and what we're doing. So you saw me piece together the heads. We've got them torqued down, over torqued those head bolts just a tad. We were at about 60 foot-pounds of torque on all the heads. There is a specific pattern that needs to be done on this, and I do them in a multiple stage. So I torque it down a little bit, and then torque it down a little bit more, and then torque it down to the final torque spec that we're going to be running here. Additionally, I've cleaned up a lot of the valley. We've got new gaskets on all of this, and we're really taking our time to clean this up, make it look presentable. You can see that it looks really nice right now, but I'm taking that extra step further. We're painting some brackets, we're fixing some like surface rust, and trying to make it look more original than worn. But I'm not trying to go over the top. And what I mean by that is I could spend a ton of money, a ton of time on this engine and the engine bay in general and make it look really super over the top nice. But things like this, I like. Things like, you know, a little bit of wear here and there. It makes it so that the car actually shows its 133,000 mile age. If I was to go over the top, redo every nut, redo every bolt, really take it to that super show car level, it's not authentic. It doesn't show the person who's looking at the car that it has 133,000 miles on it. It just looks like somebody poured money into the car. And that's not what I want to do. And so whenever I take a project like this, I'm trying to focus on the things that need to be taken care of. Certainly, let's take care of those things. But along the way, let's not ignore the fact that, the cam sensor right here just oozes all that potting solution out of its sensor. And I'll show you what I mean, because we're going to be redoing this here in a bit. Is these sensors start to leak out here, and we need to fix this because this potting solution or potting compound protects it from the elements. So before we go and put this back together, we're going to be redoing that. But if I was to ignore that, then it really shows poor maintenance, and that's not correct. I want it to look clean. I want it to look presentable. Things like the pulley here. Redid the pulley in black so it looks really nice, right? Redid all the pipes so that they look really nice and refinished. It looks like it's new, but it doesn't look like it was like done over the top, because all of the nuts and bolts have a little bit of patina on them. So I'm really just trying to make it look crisp, not like show car level, if you know what I'm saying. One, it makes it almost near impossible to maintain that level of excellence. But additionally, it's just not a good ROI when I think about restoring a car. Now, everybody's perspective of restoring is quite different. My perspective is it should look clean, it should be fully functioning, and it should be able to wow people when they open up the hood, when they go, oh wow, this car is 30 years old, but look at how great it looks underneath the hood. It looks like somebody really truly cared for it. And that's what I want. I also want it to drive right. I don't want to have to worry about, all the money that would be invested into going over the top. Right now, it's just sweat equity. So that's where we're at right now. We're going to take it, continue to take it to its finish line here. We're really focusing on getting everything prepared, though, for the intake manifold to go back on and tidying up everything before that goes into place.
All right, the next step here is to go ahead and put your intake manifold gaskets in place on both sides of the engine. These are plastic with a little rubber seal around them. They are special orientation, so go ahead and make sure that you put them right for the right side and for the left side. With your gaskets in place, you can go ahead and drop your intake manifold in place. Make sure that you manage your hoses. There are some hoses that kind of get tangled up and in the way, so just take your time. Make sure that those hoses aren't binding on anything on the firewall especially. There are a few coolant hoses that do have to get attached to the intake manifold that sit on a coolant pipe that runs underneath. So it's a little bit difficult to get your hand in there, but just take your time and you can pull those hoses up and put them into place. Additionally, you want to take note of anything on the back side of that intake manifold, like vacuum lines or coolant lines or breather hoses, that may need some attention at this point before you go ahead and torque down that intake manifold. With the intake manifold in place, you can go ahead and torque down the bolts that attach it to the heads by torquing them down to 16 foot-pounds. I apply the same torque sequence procedure that I do on everything, which is an inside-out torque sequence, but it is not noted that you need to do this on this specific one. I think it's just general good practice, so that's why you're seeing me do that here. did want to take a quick second to say that right now you can go ahead and move to installing the EGR pipe that runs the backside of the engine if you wanted to. That's completely up to you at this point, but I did not show it in the video, but I didn't want to overlook it.
All right, the next thing that we're going to do is show you how to fix this situation on your cam sensor. So for those who are unfamiliar, the cam sensor is filled with this black substance. This black substance is called a potting compound. And this is what you see running down the front side of the Acura Legend C32 engine, is that the potting compound that's filled in this sensor ends up leaking out due to the heat. The heat of the engine ends up liquefying the epoxy or the potting compound, and it oozes out running down the front side of the engine. So we're going to use a potting compound 832 HD from MG Chemicals, which is exactly that, a potting encapsulating compound. It takes 45 minutes to fully cure, but we're going to let it cure longer than that so we get a full cure. And it's relatively simple. We just put this on here and we squeeze it into all the crevices. All right, so we went ahead and filled our sensor with our potting compound. You may be asking yourself, why would I even bother doing this? Well, the idea of a potting compound is to protect the sensor from the elements. So once it all leaks out, by refilling it, we're making sure that it actually is weather tight and protected for the long haul. It's a really simple process, and instead of replacing a really good sensor that's hard to find, this is just one way that we can make it last longer, is by filling it again with this potting compound. It wasn't able to fully fill, but I really don't think that's a critical issue. The fact that the potting compound was able to fill in all the critical components and create a weather-tight seal is more important than anything. So we'll go ahead and let this cure, and then we'll get it back into the car. All right, and we have the cam sensor reinstalled after refurbishing it. So it was a relatively easy process, only cost about $20. We were able to fill in and cure that potting compound overnight, and it looks really nice reinstalled here. We cleaned up everything that we could, and we've got it ready to reconnect. So that's a relatively easy way that you can save this used cam sensor and not have to replace it. All right, so we've got the timing belt on. I've got the lower cover on. I meant to show everyone this, but the routing procedure for this belt is you start with the bottom crank, and then you throw it over the pulley over here, which is your tensioner, and then you go this cam underneath the water pump and then over to this cam. The challenge has always been the tight fitting of this belt onto this cam, so you have to loosen that tensioner, which is right here, and really pull on the belt and really work it slowly. It's a bit of a task because it hurts your hands a little bit, and you want to make sure that you don't fray or damage the belt. So you really have to just incrementally get it on each tooth until it slides on. And it should have really good tension on the belt as well, like this one does here. So it's really, you can tell when it's done right versus when it's done wrong. You get a lot of slop in the middle, or you get a slop on the edge there. Your tensioner torque is 31 foot-pounds. You also want to make sure that these are torqued down. These are 21 foot-pounds of torque. Make sure that they're there, because after you do a head gasket job like this, it's really easy to overlook these because you need the belt on to get the right torque spec, because if you try to do this without the belt, the cam just spins inside the head. So you want to make sure that as soon as you put this belt on, you're checking the torque on these. and then rotate the whole engine assembly about 5-6 times so that that belt seats nicely onto the cams and onto your water pump pulley down there. The other thing that I'll say is that a lot of people overlook putting oil on this, on both the washer and the threads here. But make sure you put oil on this. That'll make sure, just like you did with the head bolts, that the torque spec is correct. This takes a lot of torque to get this bolt on, but you know, you want to make sure that you don't have this flying off, one, and then two, you don't want to make sure you over torque it and strip your crank. So just a little tips there. But after we get this back on, we'll see how everything lines up. So you want to make sure that your dot here lines up with your line there, and you want to do the same thing. There's an arrow on this, and there's a line here, but you can see that there's a notch and a line back in there, and we'll see if we can zoom in a little bit, much like the other side. So you want to make sure that those two are in alignment, and there's a little bit of an imprint or an embossment on the crank pulley sprocket that lines up with an arrow that's on the block. So all three of those have to be in alignment before you throw the belt on, and then you want to rotate the engine to make sure that it still stays there. And then when we put the upper covers on, there's a little notch that you can make sure lines up as well. It's really easy to get one of these sprockets about one tooth off. It's usually this one, if I remember correctly, when I've done it in the past. Because when you're pulling that belt on, it's got a tendency to kind of slide a little bit forward as you're trying to work the belt on. So this cam sprocket ends up just advancing one tooth, and if you don't catch it, then your timing is going to be off. So make sure you take your time and check that a couple times before you throw everything back together and realize, oh crap, you've got one cam that's slightly more advanced than another. All right, so here's that final check I was telling you about. You can see here we've got the line on the little notch here lined up with the dot or the pink marking on the cam. And then you want to come over here and make sure that this marking is on the same line. So we've got the line on the cam cover and the yellow line in line. And then the last line you want to make sure, this is to tell if your crank is in time, is this little notch right here with that pointer. There's a couple notches that are down on the lower side of that. That's not what your focus is. You want to make sure that that line that you see there is pointed true. So we've got the engine in time, which means that we can safely turn it over without fear of crashing valves into cylinders, even though you would probably hit resistance long before that ever happened, which would be your sign to stop. But we've got the engine in time. We've got to do some cleanup work here with these cam covers, but I wanted to make sure before I proceeded too far that we had everything correctly in time for this engine. That will allow us to piece back together the final pieces, but for right now, this is where we're going to stop. All right, since I have the valve covers loose on the engine, and intentionally so, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you rotate the engine by hand. So what I'm going to do is rotate the engine with a socket and wrench on the crank pulley, and I'm just going to move the engine up and down. You see that the rocker arms are moving and the valves are opening and closing. Now this gives me the ability to make sure that the engine works smoothly and we're preventing any catastrophic events by checking to make sure that everything is working as intended. If there was any binding or any like weird noises that occurred, I'd rather find them out now. Now I don't have any spark plugs in any of the holes, so the engine turns over pretty smoothly. If I was to put spark plugs in there, I'm going to create some compression events, and that compression buildup obviously we could do, which would be the next step. But right now I just want to make sure that everything is looking and functioning as fluidly and without resistance as possible before I button everything back up. But this is looking pretty good, so we'll go ahead and continue on our way.
Alright, here I'm dropping in the fuel injector assembly with the fuel rails and the crossover hose. These fuel injectors do go into the intake manifold with little rubber gaskets and seals that cushion them as they get torqued down. So it's important to make sure that you check the torque on those fuel rails to make sure that they're in full contact. Over time, there could be a small separation as those O-rings compress. The torque spec on the nuts that hold the fuel rail to the intake manifold are 9 foot-pounds.
All right, so we've got our new, to us, off of a junkyard car, EV1 injector connectors. So you can see here we've got some broken injector connectors off on our bank of cylinders right here. If you remember from our earlier video, this bank of cylinders was the one that got really hot and where the head gasket decided to let go. Well, we've been working on trying to get these connectors. Now you can get replacement pigtail ones that aren't factory but aftermarket, and you can splice them in. But we wanted to depin these so that we could then use these from a junkyard car onto this connection right here, and so it'll look factory without us having to splice into the wire harness. But the issue is that we have to break this connection point here where the rubber waterproofing goes into the barrel of our connector. So what we have to do is take a flathead screwdriver, much like this one, and work around it. After we go ahead and do that, we're going to pull this clear little nub right here. That will allow us to pull this back and allow our wire connection points to be depinnable. And we have to depin them by inserting ever so slightly our flathead screwdriver into the top right here where the solid connection is. So we're going to go on the top side right here, right on the top right there, and we're going to push down and pull on these wires. Now that's going to allow us to pull that wire back and allow this to come out. Then we can go ahead and reinsert everything using our new connection. So that's how we'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, we've got the injectors reconnected. I ended up doing something a little bit different, and that's because these EV1s were giving me such a hard time by depinning them and repinning them. They were getting slightly bent and weren't going back in. So one of these is repinned, and the other two are actually cut off and spliced in and soldered. Just I mean, ideally you want to repin and just take those pins and insert them into the new bracket for the socket. But unfortunately, when you're faced with like really fragile metal and it keeps on trying to bend on you and it won't lock in, sometimes it's just better to break the connection, solder in a new connection with the pigtails, and then put everything back together with some heat shrink and some electrical wrap. So a really solid connection here. I'm not really worried about it, and if anything, I kind of took the strain and stress off of some of these injectors that had a really short pigtail. And since these were taken from an old car, I was able to match up the colors, so the colors are matching, obviously straight across there. That allowed us to reconnect all of our injectors, so we have everything on the left side connected and nice and firm in there. It's locked in, not going to go anywhere. And we're starting to map out some of the wiring over here. We're going to take some of these zip ties that have broken over the years, and we're going to go ahead and fix those with some new zip ties. Now on this side, I've got the valve cover still off, and the reason being is because I think we're going to be doing some additional work on this side. If you take a look right here, our master cylinder is starting to leak right at the booster point, and it's better to take care of that now. To give myself a little bit of room, I'm going to leave this just off for right now. And it should allow me to make sure that we've got our injectors all lined up too. I want to make sure that we're not putting any undue stress here and we've got them tweaked or anything like that. So we'll be able to realign everything. Everything's going back together pretty well though, and we've got a nice clean engine bay for the support of our finishing product here. I think everything up until this point is pretty easy. Our injector connectors were probably some of the larger issues, having to splice in some new connection points there. Otherwise, we could wrap this up pretty quickly, but make sure that everything goes back together real nice and firm.